You know, they're the Nazis. They're the ones that want to take the power away from you. We want to give it to you. We want to help people. They don't want to help people. They certainly don't want to help the citizen.
Isn't that ironic, eh?
Yeah. So people need to start. It's not wake up. Most people know this. Most people know. They're aware of what they're doing. They're aware of the crap that's going on. But they feel like they can't do anything about it. But this is the important thing. We are the majority. They're the people who've always been fighting for citizens initiate a referendum. They're already there. We don't need to create a party. What we need to do is unite as a people, unite as human beings who want the best for everybody in every country on the planet.
Alright, so hello everybody and welcome to the Yellow Vest Show. It's episode 9. I'm going to take an international call today with my good buddy Glenn Miller from Yellow Vest, Ireland. How are you today, Glenn?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing great. Good to hear from you. So how are the things going for the Yellow Vesters in Ireland? Give us a lowdown of what's going on.
Well, yeah, we're a 10-week-old movement here in Ireland, and we have approximately 24,000 supporters nationwide. We've been out demonstrating on the streets for the last 8 weeks. And we've had our ups and we've had our downs, but it's all going well. It's all going well.
That's good news. So, as you might realize, worldwide, all of our issues are slightly different. They're not exactly the same, but we unite under one thing, and that's corrupt government, at least the corruption within government. The Yellow Vesters want to end all of that. So tell us a bit how Ireland might have some unique demands or issues that you're dealing with. Like, for example, here in Canada, we're dealing with the carbon tax. That's a big one. We're dealing with the United Nations. That's a big one. For you guys, I guess it's the EU.
Yeah, but we're also dealing with the same issues as you guys are. We have the carbon tax coming down. We have the United Nations Migration Pact coming down. We have this new EU Army PESCO thing coming down. And various other issues. What's I don't know whether it's unique to Ireland. Well, it's not unique to Ireland, but 100 years ago in Ireland, it was written into our constitution that Articles 48 and 49 of the Constitution about citizens initiate a referendum, or as known in other countries throughout the world as RIC. Referendum initiated by the citizen. Mm-hmm. We don't call it that for historical reasons, because the RIC was originally the Royal Irish Constabulary, also known as the Black and Tans, and they carried out atrocities in Ireland. So we call it Citizens Initiate a Referendum, or CIR. Mm-hmm. But it's essentially the same thing. We had it written out of our constitution by Eamon de Valera in 1937, which in effect made the government more powerful, and the office of Prime Minister, which we call the Taoiseach's office, more powerful, and give less power to the president, but at the same time took the voice of the people away, and it allowed corruption to seep into every orifice of every education, judiciary, and all the rest of them. So, and progressively over the last 4 or 5 decades, the people's voice hasn't been heard, and policies that the government have rolled out are affecting the lives of the ordinary citizens, of the ordinary working man and woman who are out working 9 to 5 or shift hours, getting paid very little and being taxed very high. So we all essentially have the same problem. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Wow, I hear you. So it really is very, very similar. Like the main goals, the main idea. We had something similar happen to us in 1931. As a British colony, we were supposed to be given our rights back, but in return, we actually were exchanged. The politicians, they put the Queen as the sovereign. It's a little bit confusing, but basically, that was 1931, and then in 1982, it went from the Queen to the government instead of from the Queen to the people. Essentially, no more constitutional rights for the citizens as far as it was stolen in 1982 under the current prime minister that we have now. His father was the one that enacted that. So what we're asking for, our rights back, is the exact same thing. The Yellow Vest Ireland and Yellow Vest Canada. Citizens initiated referendums. Here we have multiple of those initiatives. We have the CRIC, CRIC. We do have an RIC, and we also have something called myfreedomnow.ca. It's a class action public lawsuit against our Constitution, and we're basically trying to change it so that we can get our people power back. Right? It wasn't given to us freely when it was supposed to. It was the politicians that took it over. Is that basically the same thing that happened to you, to Ireland?
Yeah, 100%. In 1922, on the Free State, we're very similar. So, 1916 to 1922, we had an Irish rebellion. We had the War of Independence, and during that time there was a treaty with the UK. So the sovereign of this country was also the same sovereign as Canada, Queen of England. But we got Home Rule, and from Home Rule we set up a constitution, and that constitution was laid out and published in 1922. In that constitution, it basically took the sovereignty away from the Queen and gave it to the individual. So the individual became the sovereign. Each individual, each citizen became the sovereign of their own country. In Articles 48 and 49 of the Irish Constitution in 1922, Free State, it gave the people the power to initiate a referendum, and the old, by consent. So how that mechanism worked would have been that the citizen would have gone out to other citizens, signed the petition, brought that to the referendum commission, and then it would be rolled out either nationally or locally or county-wide, depending on what the issue was. So when the then chief of the government, Eamon de Valera, wanted to essentially create more power for themselves, they rewrote the Constitution and they put it to a plebiscite. So a plebiscite is slightly different than a referendum, but essentially something similar. And then they changed the Constitution again, and they basically took out various bits and pieces that took away the rights of free men and women, obviously. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're very similar. We're very similar histories. In Canada and Ireland have a very long-standing relationship, and a very long history with each other. We've had several of our diaspora been leading members of various governments in Canada, and the whole idea of a republic may have sprung from an Irish mind whose new home was Canada. But we essentially have the same goals, the same. This is what most people don't understand. They keep referring to the Yellow Vest movement as Paris, France, and the violence in Paris, France, but it's not that. The Yellow Vest movement is now in over 40 countries across the world, regardless of skin color, regardless of religion, and what we are all essentially calling for on the same hymn sheet, regardless of where you might stand on the left or on the right, is citizens initiate a referendum. So we give the power to the people to decide on their future, and the power to the people to decide on what policies that they want rolled out as a nation. So not this globalism that is trying to kill off our culture, our heritage, and just for the record, the English Empire and the EU have been trying to do that to the Irish for 850 years, and it hasn't worked. And it's not going to work now, and it won't work in the future. And some people are saying that what happens in Ireland will echo around the world, because it has in the past. So yeah, citizens initiate a referendum. Yeah.
I'm hearing you. All right, so going forward, we're going to continue with protests here in Canada until we get a huge change in government. What we're looking for is our rights back. Same with you guys. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, what we should all be demanding from our government is that you're a Canadian and you're a proud Canadian, and your children will be Canadians, and their children will be Canadians, and your rights as a Canadian, your culture as a Canadian, your heritage as a Canadian should be protected above all else. That's not to say that you can't create a new history going forward, but you must cherish the history that you've already had, and its worth. And our governments are supposed to represent us, the people. Now, I understand, being a former veteran, and I work with the United Nations overseas, that there are countries that are less fortunate than our country. And at the same time, we do all we can to help these countries. But we do far more for these countries today than we are doing for our own people.
Mm-hmm.
We're spending millions and billions of dollars and euros every year on, neo-globalism politics, where that's the result of politicians making bad decisions and bad choices. Like, you and I didn't start a war in the Middle East. You and I didn't start, a war in Syria, getting millions of people to cross open Europe and across the world to be shipped off as refugees to every country on the planet. You and I didn't start that. Our politicians started it, and our politicians, in their attempt to try and fix it, are basically taking away our rights as citizens and our resources as citizens, and giving it to somebody else over us. If we take Ireland, for example, Ireland at the moment, we're the 8th wealthiest country in the world, and we have 4.5 million people live in Ireland. 2.5 million Irish citizens live outside of Ireland. and at the same time, our government would like to repopulate our country with 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever million other people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have no problem with the government doing that, but my government has no policy whatsoever on the Irish diaspora, the Irish economic refugee that left Ireland in the last decade through the bad decisions, creating a collapse. You know?
Yeah, I hear you.
It's hard to it's very hard to explain because once you start having the conversation, people automatically assume you're a racist, and they call you racist, and they attack you, and that's just to shut the argument. That's not even the argument. That's to shut the conversation down.
Yeah.
When the government is pumping resources into trying to solve the Middle Eastern refugee crisis, and at the same time it doesn't have any policy on the Irish refugee crisis. And essentially that's what they are. They're economic refugees. 2.5 million Irish people did not leave Ireland because they wanted to. They left Ireland because they do not have a decent standard of living. Services are too expensive. Services are, very difficult to access. And very, healthcare is bad, education is bad, and I could go on and on and on. And at the same time, there's approximately between 10 and 11,000 homeless people living on the streets of our country.
Yeah, same thing. We don't take care at all of our homeless people the way that we take care of others in other countries, and it's not racist to talk about that sort of thing. You have government overspending our taxpayer dollars where it shouldn't be. Actually, I know an immigrant. He's from India, and we just gave India $2 billion, and he's baffled by the sense that people are getting called racist for opposing it. He wanted to keep the money in Canada, and this is an immigrant from India, and he disagreed with it entirely. There's misspending, overspending. The misuse of it is definitely it's a big reason why people are waking up. They're not taking care of our veterans that have gone to war for us. They've had so many cuts to their funding and pensions and of course if you get injured now, the waiting list on in the court trials and trying to actually get compensation now is near impossible. A lot of the veterans are committing suicide, or they're not even bothering with the court cases anymore. They'll drop them themselves. It's just taking too long, or they're dying out for the reasons of their injuries, and they're not being taken care of. It's easy to see why so many people are standing up for their country. It's good to give, right? But it's also a matter of self-sufficiency, which is a huge part of our argument here for Yellow Vest Canada anyway. Self-sufficiency, it includes the carbon tax, it includes us using our own oil as opposed to Saudi Arabian oil, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? And yeah, it all makes sense. So I'm with you on that subject. So far, everything I'm hearing from you, we're experiencing at the same time. So if you have anything more, keep going on.
I'll give you a really good one. So Ireland recently, in the last decade or so, found oil and gas in Ireland.
Wow.
And the politicians, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they would give it away for free.
What?
For free.
Oh my God.
You couldn't make it up. You couldn't. apparently the wells were so deep that it was economically unviable for Ireland to drill it. So they gave it for free to Denmark. And I'm not making it up. It's true.
Wow.
One of the wells that was tapped is apparently worth, 5 billion um, euros, and we gave it away for free.
Wow. That could have
Now,
instantly solved the 11,000 homeless problem. Like, instantly.
oh yeah, and here's where it gets even more interesting. So, since we joined the EU, the European Community, they have put quotas on our fishermen to reduce the amount of fish they fish in the Irish seas. And at the same time, they've allowed other EU countries to take our fish, over 200 billion euros worth of fish. So we didn't benefit by that membership while they were stealing our fish. Now, hold that thought for a second. And here's another more frightening, startling statistic. Of all the multinational corporations in the world, 3,000 of them run their profits through Ireland, and they pay no tax, zero,
Wow.
no benefit to the Irish people whatsoever. And just so you know what the figures are, it's between $6 and $8 trillion. That's trillion dollars a year. If we apply the corporation tax to that, we would take 800 billion euros in tax. We get nothing.
Wow.
How is it? So these are the decisions that the politicians in Ireland have made, and not just the current government, but successive previous governments. We have a revolving door system of Fianna Fáil, which is supposedly a Republican party, and then we have Fine Gael, which is a Conservative party, and we have a revolving door from one group to the other group. And just to explain what they are basically is that the Fianna Fáil party is the builders' party. So they're the guys who build houses. They don't really build much more than just houses.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Fine Gael party, which is predominantly made up traditionally of farmers. But over the last decade or 2 decades, it's kind of, one's gone very liberal and the other one's gone very, I don't know, also liberal. So they're essentially the same party.
Yeah.
So they just have a revolving door of, you be the leader, then I'll be the leader, then you be the leader, and I'll be the leader. So we have politicians making secret arrangements and secret treaties with each other to put themselves into power. The current Taoiseach was not elected as the Taoiseach or the Prime Minister of Ireland. And the previous Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, was a disaster. The previous Taoiseach, Brian Cowan, was worse. And the previous Taoiseach before him was Bertie Ahern. Well, even when if you look up his antics, all you will see is corruption, 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 and more corruption. So now we have a judiciary that throw people into prison for anywhere from 3 months to 2.5 years for calling a judge corrupt. Our colleagues, Brian McCarthy, Joe Ducey, Ben Gilroy, they're all serving prison sentences for contempt of court. And at the same time, we have convicted criminals walking around who've never served a day in prison.
Mm. Yeah.
Our banking crisis cost Ireland and the taxpayers in Ireland 64 billion euros. And we'll be paying that back 3 generations from now to the IMF. And at the same time, we, the Irish, bailed out Europe's banks disproportionately than everybody else in Ireland. And why I say disproportionately is because Ireland makes up less than 1% of the entire EU. And at the same time, we bailed out the banks in the EU and paid for it. The Irish taxpayer pays for it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at some sort of fairness. You know, there has to be a balance somewhere. We can't always be the ones paying for everything. We can't always be the ones getting shafted by neoliberal politics and stupid ideas. The current Taoiseach went and signed Ireland up to the UN Migration Pact, and although that is generally a good thing, he never asked the people in a referendum, which he's supposed to do. He then went and signed us up to a military organisation. We're a neutral country. We don't fight wars. We don't get involved in wars that are fought around the planet over whatever reason they're fought over. And he signed us up to an EU army without the permission of the people, just because he thinks it's a good idea. That's just madness. That's a dictatorship.
Yeah.
You know? And now what he wants to do is part of the UN migration, UN migration treaty that's signed, part of that is censorship. Most people don't realise that as soon as you start talking about immigration, you'll be censored. So they won't have to call you a racist anymore. They'll just censor you. That's it. You end the conversation, you're censored, gone. So if you're in a political organisation, or if you're in a group, or a community group, or a community organisation, the minute you open your mouth about a migrant, boom, gone. There's nothing wrong with migrants. There's absolutely nothing wrong with migrants. You know, like, the migrants live everywhere. You know, we all get along, move around, we do what we do to try and get along and create a life worth living.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. And if all of these monies that are being corrupted out of Ireland, and not just Ireland, out of Canada, out of the US, out of every other developed nation in the world, if this money was used properly, all of these refugees wouldn't have to leave their homes. Because essentially you're only creating another problem down the road, and the problem is that if those people who have the means and the method to leave their country, even though the country might be in a deplorable state, you're creating a problem for the people that live there, because the ones that live there don't have the means to get out of it. And the very best of the people, the highly educated, are the ones that leave first. They're the ones that tend to fix the problems. They're the ones that tend to create governance that's fairer, without corruption, without deceit.
Yeah.
And if you leave behind nothing but poverty and starvation and war and famine, the people who profit from that are the ones that become the governance. And they just make it worse. Simple as. They just make it worse. And we've seen that for the last 100 years in Africa, we've seen it in the Middle East, we've seen it in India, Pakistan, we've seen it in China, we've seen it in Russia, we've seen it in America, we've seen it in South America, everywhere. Doesn't matter where it is, we've seen it everywhere. It doesn't work. Try and keep the best of the people in your country. Stop them. Not stop them from leaving, but afford them the choice that you can build a life worth living here and have the same life somewhere else. That you don't have to leave. You can have the opportunities are the same. Like, as I said, like we're a nation of 2.5 million citizens. Sorry, 4.5 million citizens, and over 2 million citizens, 2.5 million citizens, and their children live abroad. So, like, in the Irish diaspora alone, it's an estimated 100 million people worldwide. That 100 million people didn't get there because things were nice and cozy here on the island of Ireland. They got here because of war and famine and terror and murder, rape and pillage. That's why they left the shores of Ireland. And the people that But the best of Ireland lives abroad. The most creative, the highly educated, the poets, the singers, the scholars, they all live abroad. And our government has no policy to ever bring them home. You know?
Yeah, it's almost like a repopulation sort of depopulation agenda.
Yeah.
I wanted to make note of one thing you said: censorship, as well as the strengthening of what we're allowed to say. It's getting stricter. It's free speech is on the decline.
Giving the EU and the UN essential, that their laws supersede our laws, and our leaders go over there and they just sign it. That's it. And essentially, so if you and I start talking about migration, even if it's not derogatory, even if it's just we want to have a conversation on the best way forward, on the best way to treat immigrants coming into our nation, to treat them with dignity. And I'll give you an example. So in Ireland, we take in immigrants, and we put them into what's not all immigrants now, right? So refugees are other countries, and these refugees are put into what we call direct provision. What that is that they are housed in like a camp or a hotel, and they're basically left there for anywhere between a year, 2 years, and in some of the more horrendous cases, 10 years. They're not allowed work. They must leave the hotel at 12 o'clock in the morning. They're not allowed to come back till 6 o'clock in the evening. And we have nearly 70,000 people living in these type of conditions. That's no better than a concentration camp. Mm. That's no better than what the Nazis did to the Jews and the Europeans during the Second World War. We're allowing no dignity, no opportunity of creating a life worth living. And that's the most important thing here, is the pursuit of happiness and a decent life. So, but if we talk about that, if you and I have a conversation about that, we can essentially be arrested and criminalized and jailed for not just 1 or 2 years, but several years. It could be essentially an offence against the state, and I don't know what it is in Canada, but it's 14 years here in Ireland for an offence against the state.
So I got one question on that matter. Ireland did sign the UN Migration Pact. We signed it back in January.
Yeah. We signed it. I think it was the same day, wasn't it?
Okay, so essentially it says that it's non-binding, right? Which both you and I, we don't believe that for a second that that's going to be the way it is right now. But let's say it is right now, at this very moment, it's not binding, right? So we're still speaking up. They haven't removed us from the internet yet. Let's put a smile on and say that we're allowed to speak about this right now. And if we don't continue by the thousands, and I mean not just hundreds, but if thousands of people continue speaking up about this, that we're, even just the censorship part of the Migration Pact, even just that one part alone, everybody should be standing up right now and speaking out against censorship. Right? So why wouldn't we all be speaking out about this right now? I think it's a great idea that we are, and I'm encouraging others to do it. So while it's non-binding, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. What everybody is afraid of, you have to remember that a lot of people are afraid of the Yellow Vest movement on a whole. So the government is terrified of the Yellow Vest movement because we essentially want to take their power and give it to the people. We want the people to decide for themselves what they want. So we want the people to decide whether they want a UN migration pact. We want the people to decide whether they don't want it. We're not telling the people what to think. We're offering the people the choice to think for themselves. So that's the first part. The second part is most average people like yourself and myself, most tax-paying, decent, law-abiding citizens are terrified of the Yellow Vest movement, because when they see the Yellow Vest movement in the media, they see riots and burning cars and burning streets in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But they don't see the demonstrations that are happening in Kenya. They don't see the demonstrations that are happening in New Zealand, in Australia, in America, in Venezuela, in Ireland, in the UK. They'll only ever see what the media wants them to see. I would encourage everybody to go onto social media, to look up on Facebook, who, to its credit, hasn't silenced the Yellow Vest movement. To its credit, is allowing the Yellow Vest movement for our free speech. We here in Ireland 2 weeks ago, we occupied the Google headquarters in Ireland for European Google headquarters because they turned off the dissenter's voice, a lady called Gemma O'Doherty, who's an award-winning published journalist who speaks very candidly and very openly about the various different agendas. Now, I'm just a simple guy. I'm a father of 4 children. I'm disabled. I'm a retired veteran, and I don't see all of that stuff. My eyes only opened to this 10 weeks ago when I noticed what was going on in France, and I was like, why are they, freaking out? And when I read more about it, the people were crying out because they were being taxed too much. They couldn't pay any more tax. They were taxed out, and they essentially wanted to bring in another tax to put on top of it. My government wants to do the same thing. They want to charge every man, woman and child in Ireland €3,000 a year, when the average person is getting paid. The average industrial wage is about about €30,000 a year. But what's after happening in Ireland is that between 2014 to 2016, we had 16% of Ireland was living in systemic poverty. For the wealthiest country in the world, 16% of our citizens were living in systemic poverty. Mm-hmm. And you would think that for a wealthy country like Ireland, that poverty would reduce. So between 2016 and 2018, poverty increased to 25%.
Oh my goodness!
So that's a 9% increase in 2 years. Of the wealthiest country in Europe, the 8th wealthiest country in the world, poverty levels went up. And poverty is still going up. And the average person living in systemic poverty is given welfare. And the welfare is about, they get paid €198 a week. But the average cost of living in Ireland is about €270 a week. So you're already down. Before you even start, you're already down. So you live on the poverty line. That sounds very expensive when you're talking about figures. It sounds very expensive. €270 a week. I'm not sure how much that is in dollars. Probably about $300 or $320. That sounds like a lot of money. But if you take into consideration that the average rent in Ireland is €1,400 a month,
Yeah, nobody can
And you're
afford to
getting,
live.
so you're getting paid €1,000 a month, or if you're on welfare, you're getting €800 a month, and the average rent is €1,400 a month. Where do you live? So the government provides social housing, but the government in Ireland hasn't built social housing for almost 20 years. So all of these people that can't afford to rent are now falling into homelessness, and the government are still not building. So, you know, and at the same time, they want to bring all these people from abroad and all these refugees and foreign nationals to live in Ireland. There's nowhere to live. There's no houses for them. They want to bring 1 million of them here with no houses.
Wow.
Where are they going to put them? In the fields or tents? You know, so it doesn't make any sense. So what we're saying, so we talk about, yeah, bring 1 million people here, but build 1 million homes for them first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't just land them all here and they all walk around the place going, oh, where are we all going to live? Because there aren't enough houses. They haven't built enough houses over the last. And another thing is that the vulture funds. I don't know if you know what a vulture fund is. I'm sure you do.
No.
The vulture funds in Ireland have created. They're buying up. So here we'll start. So Ireland's had a recession, one of the worst recessions in history. Just before that recession, we had an economy that was known as the Celtic Tiger. And at the very end of the Celtic Tiger, our politicians, the guy I was talking about earlier, Bertie Ahern, when there was rumours that the world was going to collapse into the toilet, and he said to the Irish people, get off the fence or commit suicide. And that there's no problem, there's no recession coming, the bubble isn't going to burst. So of course, Irish people being trusting people and trusting their politicians, hundreds of thousands of us went out and we bought mortgages. We bought mortgages for huge money. So the average price of a house was 250 to 350,000 euros. So and people had their families. And then we had the crash and everything collapsed and people lost their jobs and people couldn't afford these mortgages. So these mortgages are now being sold to the vulture funds. And the vulture funds have come into Ireland now and they're saying, right, out you go. You're being evicted.
Wow.
So this year we have 27,000 people, 27,000 properties or dwellings are facing eviction in Ireland. So that's 27,000 families, because this would have been a family buying a home, you know, and they would have had children in the interim. So in 11 years they would have had children in the interim. So, you know, it's probably a married couple with 2 children or 1 child or maybe 3 children. And they're essentially now going to be added to the homelessness. So, and that's 27,000 this year, another 27,000 next year, and another 27,000 the following year. So over 100,000 properties will be evicted. Now, these properties will be put up to rent. Who's going to rent them? The 1 million foreign nationals being brought into Ireland. Who's going to pay for it? These people are essentially poor people. So they're not going to be able to get work unless it's low-paid work. So the government are going to have to subsidise. So the government is going to pay the vulture funds to rent the houses. Who owns the vulture funds? The government. The government's family. The 1%.
Yeah.
So, and then at the same time, then we'll have another 160,000 people on the homeless list in the next 3 years, and that's the first batch. Then there's another batch that comes after that. When interest rates start to go up, price of the cost of living has gone up, the cost of salaries has gone down. No one can meet their repayments. They'll be the next on the chopping block. Most Irish middle class people are now called the working poor. Middle class people are now called the working poor. So the guys that had the two family holidays and the two cars 11 and 12 years ago are now walking to work, don't have a holiday, and can't afford. They have to make a choice between the heating and the food. That's the new reality in Ireland.
Yeah, I hear you. Canada's gone through the same thing. We have no middle class anymore. It's very small anyway. In fact, when I was just a young one, we were very middle class, very, let's say, upper middle class. And now, I must say, with the exact same income, we're very lower class. Inflation, the rate of taxation, everything accounted for. Our situations are not looking good. The poor are getting much poorer. The rich aren't even getting richer. I can't say that. It's the elite, the 0.001% that keep getting richer off these scenarios. It's almost like they're planning them, a planned demise. I don't want to get into too much conspiracy, but it really does seem like this is happening worldwide and not just in our country or yours.
Yeah, but this isn't the first time this has happened. This isn't the first time that this has been rolled out in history. It might seem a little contrived, more contrived now, the fact that we have social media and we're able to talk openly about it as ordinary people.
Mm.
But it's happened before. In Ireland, it happened in the 80s. There were thousands of people who lost their homes. In the 1900s, it happened here in Ireland during the land clearance, and when the British Empire were confiscated people's lands and homes, and those people that they confiscated the lands and homes from, they're your ancestors, because they essentially ended up in Canada and America and Australia to help populate those countries. It's by no accident that this has happened before and it'll happen again. But at what expense? At what expense? Is it going to be at the expense of your culture? Is it going to be at the expense of your heritage? Are you willing to sacrifice your national identity, culture, and heritage so that someone can make a profit? Like, there's nothing wrong with being a patriot and also being a human being and tapping into your humanity to look after your fellow man. That's what we all want to do. We all want to do that. We're not the Nazis. Your government is the Nazi. They're the Nazis. They're the ones that want to take the power away from you. We want to give it to you. We want to help people. They don't want to help you. They certainly don't want to help the citizen.
Isn't that ironic, eh?
Yeah. So people need to start. It's not wake up. Most people know this. Most people know. They're aware of what they're doing. They're aware of the crap that's going on. But they feel like they can't do anything about it. But this is the important thing. We are the majority. We, the people, are the majority. We decide. Not them. We can take them out just as quick as put them in. Like, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Like, people keep calling on the LFS movement to create political parties. No. The right people will present themselves. political activists. There's loads of them out there. There's any amount of them out there. Smart, clever people who've been fighting the cause of civil liberties for decades. They're the people who've always wanted direct democracy. They're the people who've always been fighting for citizens-initiated referendum. They're already there. We don't need to create a party. What we need to do is unite as a people, unite as human beings who want the best for everybody in every country on the planet. Mm-hmm. Not based on the colour of your skin, not based on, like, okay, isn't it great that the white guy from Ireland is saying that, you know, we want everything not based on racism. But as an Irishman, right, as a white man, the Irish people have been always treated with disdain, disrespect, and racism throughout the world. In what is it, in 13 days' time, you will have St. Patrick's Day parades all over the world, where people will adorn themselves with green hats and leprechaun suits and drink till the cows come home. Because, yeah, you know, the Irish, that's what the Irish do. The Irish only do that, you know.
Yeah.
How racist can you be?
Yeah, really, yeah. I never thought about that one because I was Irish myself, yeah, by background.
So to denigrate an entire people and their heritage and the culture down to a bottle of booze, you know, just because we're white, it's okay. You know, like Ireland was a nation before most nations in the world were nations. In the 6th century, Ireland was referred to as a nation, long before the UK were ever referred to as a nation, long before France was ever referred to as a nation. So our culture, our heritage is global. And I'll just give you an example. I'm not trying to go off topic either. This is the importance of heritage.
Yeah.
And it's the importance of culture. So you and I both come from a Christian society. Yeah?
Yeah.
And we celebrate Christmas. And we celebrate Halloween. And we celebrate Easter. And we celebrate a dozen other Christian festivals throughout the year. And the thing that all these festivals have in common is forgiveness, love, compassion, and family. But what most people don't realize is all of those traditions are Celtic traditions. Those traditions came from Ireland in the 3rd century because the Christian church couldn't convert the Irish. But what they could do is mirror the Irish. So the next time you're going out for Halloween, All Hallows Eve, it's an Irish holiday. Christmas is an Irish holiday.
Wow.
Easter is an Irish holiday.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, but it was an Irish holiday 1,000 years before Christianity. And most people don't know about their own culture, their own identity, and their own history. And if you're an Irish Canadian or an Irish American or an Irish Australian, I would absolutely plead with you to look at your history and your heritage, where your family came from, and why you are where you are. Because you didn't get there because of love and peace and happiness, mm-hmm. and because your family wanted to see the world. You got there because of what was done to the Irish people, you know, and we know better. Don't get me wrong when I say that, I'm not being flip, but when it comes to, having all sorts of badness done to you. Uh, we've had 850 years of war and famine, death, destruction,
Slavery.
to our people. Yeah, slavery. The first slaves to the American colonies weren't black slaves, they were Irish slaves. And I know I'd be killed for saying that, because that must be a really racist thing to say, but look it up. It's true. It's historical. It's a fact. The Mayflower, that sank. That's your history. Your history is based on immigration.
Yeah.
In a time, in tumultuous times when there wasn't enough room left in Europe. And at the same time, the people that were sent there were the people that they didn't want here. So essentially that's happening again. So in the last 11 years, we've had 700,000 Irish citizens emigrate due to economic reasons. So that's economic refugees. And at the same time, the UN are making us take in what they call economic refugees from other countries. So you're going to have to scratch your head and say, well, if the UN migration is making you take in UN economic refugees, well then why aren't the Irish also considered a refugee?
Yeah, serious.
So why is there no policy to bring these people home? So because it's about replacement. It's about, but where do we go? Where do we go from here? So, do we replace everybody? Do all the Canadians move to America? Do all the Americans move to South America? Does everybody move to Ireland? Feel free if you want to. But, where does it all end? Is it about erasing our culture? Is it about erasing our identity and our heritage? Is it about getting rid of all the things that make us good people? So I'll give you another little analogy here, a little historical analogy. Many of your viewers won't know anything about Irish history, and they've heard me saying that we've had 800 years of war, famine, and death, and destruction.
Yeah.
And because of that history, we've also had 800 years of migration. And that migration has spread out throughout the world. And as I said, you would have heard me saying it as well, we have 100 million in the Irish diaspora, all across the world. Mm-hmm. Approximately 40 million in America alone. Mm-hmm. But if you go to the signatories of the American Declaration of Independence, you'll find that 3 or 4 of the signatories were Irish. If you go to your own constitution, you'll find that some of the writers were Irish. If you go to the Argentinian constitution, you'll find that some of them are Irish. Same in Mexico, same in New Zealand, same in Kiwi, same in Australia. All of the developed nations in the world, you'll find that there's an Irishman's signature somewhere on it. And not just one, but several.
Yeah.
You'll find it in all of the wars against tyranny and against imperialism. You'll find a paddy standing in a ditch behind somebody.
Yeah.
And I would challenge anybody to find me a war that has fought against tyranny and imperialism and globalism, to find me where there's not a paddy involved. I think had Ireland not had such an awful history, then we wouldn't have a developed world. We'd have monarchies still,
Yeah. That's a big piece. That's important information.
If you ask your Indian friend, I have a couple of Indian friends as well, and India has also got a very colourful history with Ireland. If you look at the Indian flag, so the Indian flag is also a tricolour, and the reason why it's a tricolour is because the Irish men that were sent to subjugate the Indians rose up and fought against the British and started the Indian War of Independence, which eventually allowed India to become an independent nation free from the British Empire. And it was started by a young Irishman called Daly, who was subsequently executed. But the Indian, when India became a nation, they honoured Ireland by making their flag the same as Ireland.
Yeah, just sideways.
Yeah, but it's the same. It's the same colour.
Yeah.
But that's why they made the flag. We have a huge history. Like we have a huge history with India. So much so that the current Prime Minister is first generation Irish-born Indian. So there's irony for you.
Yeah. This conversation was amazing. I really had a good time talking with you. Thanks very much for being on the LFS show. And is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers? Normally I ask this during my interviews. What's something you'd like to say to a curious viewer right now, if they were watching?
I would tell them not to be afraid, not to allow others to make the decisions for them. You believe in your own country, your own nation, your own people, your own heritage, your own culture. Fight for it. And protect it, cherish it, love it. Just like you do your family, just like you do your relatives, just like you do your friends. Be open, you know. And don't be afraid of what the LFS movement stands for. We're not the boogeyman underneath the top. The more of us who unite together will be the boogeyman for the government. Simple as. You know?
I hear you, Glenn. Thanks so much again. What time is it there?
It is 2:15 in the morning.
Jeez. Thank you so much for this interview. I really do appreciate your coming on the show. Thanks again, Glenn.
I'd just like to wish everybody in Canada a very happy St. Patrick's Day next week. I hope you all get out and celebrate your culture,
Yep.
your Irishness.
We will.
Even if it is only small. But remember, cherish everybody and love everybody. And open your eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Glenn. We'll talk to you later, all right?
God bless.
God bless you too.